Or mess them up. Okay. Test. Oh, there we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Brown Bag Speakers Forum here at the Albany Library. My name is Mary Zalia, and I'm the Health and Fitness Director at the Albany YMCA. And as you know, together with the library, we've been presenting speakers since 2006 here. I want to tell you about next month's speaker before I introduce today's. I'm very happy to be sharing with you that one of our former fitness instructors at the Albany Y, her name was Brianna Munson. Her name is still Brianna Munson. While she was a fitness instructor, she was contemplating going back to school to get her PhD in physical therapy. She was really talented, knew a lot, had a great background in PE as well as biology from UC Berkeley. Anyway, she did go to UC San Francisco, and she just completed, I think actually this week, her PhD in physical therapy. And she's coming back to discuss happiness. Interesting. You wouldn't think that's what she was going to be talking about, but her research has been focused around happiness and how the physical implications of that, and how our emotions affect our physical being, of course. So positive emotions have shown to increase physical health outcomes, including cardiovascular, endocrine, immunological system activity. And Brianna will be exploring and demonstrating evidence-based activities that have been shown to increase happiness, as well as discuss the expected physical health outcomes. So I think that should be really interesting. If you don't remember her, if you knew her from the Y, she's delightful, very personable, very, very knowledgeable. Anyway, she will be here next month on May 11th, same time, same station. So that's next month. And then today we are really, really lucky to have with us Amy Block-Joy. She'll be discussing mostly her book, Retaliation, which is up here. She has written another book called Whistleblower. They are both for sale. You can get them after her discussion. But Amy received her BA in biochemistry and bacteriology from UC Berkeley in 1974 and her PhD in nutritional sciences from UC Berkeley in 1979. She was hired by UC Berkeley in 1980 to improve the well-being of poor families. In 1994, while on faculty at UC Davis, Amy created a new program to help low-income families improve their diet and health. In 2013, she retired from her faculty position at Davis after 33 years of service there. Retaliation is her book chronicling her discovery of fraud and reporting the misuse and the consequences that followed. These books will both be on sale. She is currently emeritus professor, I always want to say that the other way, and teaches an undergrad class at UC Davis on ethics. Please give a warm welcome to Amy Block-Joy.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here today, and thank you all for coming. And thank you, Mary and Vivian, for inviting me to speak. Before I begin to tell my whistleblower story, I'd like to set the stage. I believe workplaces everywhere will be seeing more whistleblowers. This is good. It means that people care about the workplace and they care about ethics. However, this also means retaliation will happen. Retaliation is predictable, costly in terms of money, time, and resources. And it's also, like other forms of discrimination, difficult to stop once it begins. I wrote my books as a cautionary tale. There are risks to blowing the whistle. People get fired, demoted, moved to undesirable locations, harassed, threatened, and have reputation damage, and usually their career is ended. Don't get me wrong, one should not ignore wrongdoing or misconduct in the workplace. It's the reporting of it that's difficult, and that leads to consequences that you may not ever imagine. It's also very dangerous. So my message is workplaces need to be safer for all of us. So now for the story. The setting is at UC Davis. The beginning of the setting is 2006 in February. At the time, I was on the faculty and also the director of a program for poor Californians. At the time, I was receiving an annual grant of $14 million, and this was a statewide nutrition program to help poor families. And things were going very smoothly. I'd been doing this program for 14 years, and I was feeling very confident. We had just had a big audit by the government, and things seemed to be going very well. Now, before I tell you about the story, and I'm going to start with Whistleblower, which is actually what happened. Retaliation is what happened afterwards. So before you can understand retaliation, you need to understand the life of a whistleblower. So this story, there are some characters in it that are real, myself. I also use the real name of the person who committed the majority of the crimes. Her name is Beverly Binford. I'm using her real name because it's in the public domain. The other characters are not the real names of the real people. The events are real, and the facts of the case are real, and I have rigorously researched everything to write this book. But I want to introduce you to Raymond Savage. He is not his real name. He is my boss, supervisor, and chair of the department I was working in. He was a very charismatic, scientifically renowned person, and a superstar at Davis. Beverly was my subordinate. She was my budget manager, a very charming, efficient, responsible, and I considered highly trustworthy. Percy Grossman is the third character. He is the dean of the college and actually a high-level official at UC Davis. Again, not his real name. He had also been a good friend of mine for 2 decades and had supported me throughout my career, both at Berkeley and at Davis. So, beginning in 2006, we were receiving $14 million, and I was working on the next year's budget. I was working at home in my kitchen on this 4-page spreadsheet for a proposal that was only $60,000. Beverly gives me a call and says there's a meeting, so I jump in my car and drive to Davis. When I get to Davis, I go to the meeting and I forgot the spreadsheet. It's still on my kitchen table. So I asked Beverly for a copy from the files, which she brings to me very promptly and efficiently. And I notice immediately the copy that she brought me is very different than the one that I'd been working on. The difference is mainly in the budget. Mine was $60,000. The one she brings me from the files is $210,000. There's also a handwritten note in the margin. It says 150K for Raymond Savage. And I thought that was weird. So I went up to see Raymond and walked in his office and showed him the spreadsheet and the note. And he said, "Oh, that's a math error. Have Beverly correct it." I went down to Beverly and showed it to her. She also said it was a math error. She blamed it on one of her staff and said, "Don't worry, I'll fix it right away." And she shooed me back into my office. Well, worry I did, because that didn't look like a math error to me. So I waited until she left for home, and at 5 o'clock I went into the office files. Our file room is about as big as this room because we have to keep records of all our clientele for 7 years. And we had 150,000 clientele each year. So we had a lot of records. So I opened one of the file cabinets and discovered it was locked, and I didn't have a key. So that was very troubling. The next morning, I arrived very early at work, asked Beverly for the key. She appropriately explained, this is a federal program, I can't have people walking off with files, so I lock it before I go home for the day, and I open it in the morning. She showed me where the key was. That all made sense, but I took a chair, and I plopped it down next to one of the file cabinets and opened it up because I was still quite concerned. Well, in the middle of that file cabinet, there was a red folder with the name Raymond Savage on it. And I thought, that's weird, so I pulled it out, and in that file, there was about 20 pages, letters and some notes, and there was a purchase order that knocked my socks off. There were so many red flags. The first one is, I didn't approve it, and I was the director of the program with the signature authority. The second red flag was that Beverly had approved it. Not only had she approved it, she also had certified it. The price of the item was $1,400. way more than we usually spend. In fact, usually when we buy things for the program, it's under $500. But the worst was the description of the item. Canon obtura. Had no idea what that was. It was vague. And then Beverly, in her handwriting, had written in quotes, pick up from vendor. So I didn't say anything to Beverly or anyone. I put the red file back into the file cabinet, went to my office and called the vendor, which was another red flag, actually, Fry's Electronics. Do you know Fry's Electronics? Okay. I didn't know UC Davis was using Fry's as a vendor. I called Fry's and asked him what a Canon obtura was. And they told me it's a mini DVD camcorder. You can hold it in your hand. It makes DVDs, and there's all these gadgets that came with it. That's why it was so expensive, even in 2006. Well, this was very troubling because our program didn't make DVDs. We bought them already made. So this, to me, looked like misuse of government funds, and I was very, very upset. But mostly, I wondered, well, maybe I'm jumping to conclusions. I should really give Beverly an opportunity to explain. Policy dictates that I'm supposed to report even possible misuse of government funds to my supervisor. But my supervisor, Raymond Savage, really liked Beverly. And I really liked Beverly, too. And I thought, well, the best thing to do would be to report to him at the same time giving her a chance to explain. So I arranged a meeting. March 2nd was the day, a day I'll never forget. And I told them both I just wanted to meet with them to update the budget. So for 2 days, I did a whole bunch of soul searching. And then being a scientist, I also did some scientific research by watching episodes of Law and Order on TV, which turned out to be very, very helpful because during the meeting, I thought exactly what I was going to do. In fact, I was so nervous, I figured I'd write it out in a paragraph so it wouldn't sound accusatory, very neutral. I would read it out loud to her and Raymond, and then I would ask some relevant questions. So the meeting came. I positioned Beverly near the door. I had no idea how she would react. I thought she may want to run out. I didn't want her to run over me on her way out of the door. So I also brought Kleenex. I didn't know if she'd cry. I mean, I had all sorts of questions about how this would go. But I know I was very nervous. And I handed them each a letter with attached was the PO, and I read out loud the paragraph, and then I asked Beverly, where's the DVD camcorder? And she said, it's in my garage. I was quite surprised. I thought she would deny it. And in fact, she was very poised. She did not appear at all upset. And the whole meeting, she was very quiet. However, my boss was stunned, and he was shaking his head. And I thought at the time, well, he's just as upset as I am about this. And then he sort of took over the meeting. He said to Beverly, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put Amy's letter and this PO into the vault, and Beverly's going to bring back the DVD camcorder and take it back to Fry's, and we're just going to go on. Employees make these kind of mistakes. And I said, wait a minute. We need to change her job description. And, we all agreed that would be a good idea. She needs to be monitored. We need to make it clear that doesn't have signature authority. And that I said, I don't think Fry's is going to take it back. Beverly needs to write a check to the UC Regents. So the next day, she did, and I asked her also for a letter of confession, and she wrote that too. She said, it must have been the holidays, that caused her to have some misjudgment. And it all went into the vault, and I didn't feel comfortable. I thought, wait, is this really enough? I had actually done what the policy states. I had reported it to my boss. The policy, though, doesn't tell you what to do if your boss chooses to ignore it. But I felt morally compromised by this, and so I met with Raymond, and I told him so. And this is when the first issue of retaliation happened. He started threatening me. First, he started saying, you're too strict, you're a rule following, loosen up, lighten up, and people are complaining about you. And then the issue started to be about me rather than about what had happened. So I actually said, I think we need to report this to the dean's office. Do you want to do it or should I do it? He actually had me talk to the vice chair about it. Now, the vice chair seemed really interested, but all he did for the next 4 months was had me write more letters to the file. However, meanwhile, I was collecting a lot of documentation, and everything that they told me to do, I put in an email. At the time, I wasn't sure why I was doing it. It was just something that I got used to doing because I'd worked for 10 years at the Office of the President, and they take this sort of thing very seriously. But Beverly did get better. She, in fact, got very remorseful. She came crying to my office. She wrote letters taking full responsibility, and I thought maybe everything would be okay. However, I went on vacation, and while I was away, Beverly signed another purchase order. I guess she forgot. Anyway, that really upset me, and I stripped her of all responsibility. I wanted to terminate her, but the chair would not allow that to happen. And in fact, all he would let me do was monitor her. So again, I wrote it up and stripped her of her responsibility and met with the staff that actually reported to her and told them that they were now reporting to me. I didn't give them an explanation because it was all pretty confidential. So that very night, one of the staff called me and said that Beverly was committing travel fraud, and she had been doing it for a few years, and that I wouldn't find it on campus because it was being stored in an outside location. She had found a loophole in the system that allowed her to get the reimbursement on an emergency basis and actually not even ask me to sign anything, even though I was her direct supervisor. So I did a small audit at Davis in the accounts department where I'd been told it was stored. And sure enough, I got a couple examples. It took 4 hours for them to actually find the travel that she was submitting. And sure enough, anyone want to guess who was signing it?
Raymond?
Yes. But even then, I wasn't too surprised. Somehow, the chair of the department usually does sign off on travel after the direct supervisor. So I went to, this was a Friday afternoon, I went to the chair and said, I now have evidence that there's travel fraud. We need to report this right now. And he said, whoa, take a step back. I need to look into this. I need to talk to Beverly. I looked at his watch. It's 4 o'clock. The dean's office isn't. No one's going to be there. It's a Friday. So I said, no, we need to do it now. And then he started threatening me. You need to keep quiet about this. Don't talk to anyone. This is my responsibility. This is not your responsibility. So that night, I started thinking about the fact that he didn't even seem upset. He seemed like it was no big deal, and that really bothered me, and this is when I decided to write a whistleblower report. In 2006, they didn't have an anonymous hotline that you could use. In fact, it was hard figuring out what to do, so I created my own whistleblower report. I did find a form on the UC Davis website. It was called Form A, which is reporting the allegations. It was about an inch of space. Well, my report was initially 40 pages, and then I thought I'd better reduce it. So it was 4 pages, and then all the evidence I had collected. And I sent it to Raymond, I sent it to the vice chair, I sent it to the dean's office, I sent it to Percy, who was the person above the chair of the department. I sent it to the provost's office, HR, and I sent it to the chancellor. I figured someone is going to care about this as much as I do. Well, I had the best night's sleep, which I can say was the best night's sleep I had for 7 years later because everything kind of started untangling. Not necessarily quickly, but because this lasted for 7 more years. But the next thing that happened was Monday was coming around and Beverly was going to come to work, and I was worried that she would destroy the evidence. So I asked the dean's office, I asked Percy to help me put her on some kind of leave. Well, all I received from the dean's office was a template of a letter for putting a person on investigatory leave. And I didn't actually think that it should be my responsibility to do that. In fact, I felt that there was a big conflict of interest since I was the whistleblower. And by the way, my report was not anonymous. I felt this was part of my job responsibility, so I definitely made it under my director name. Well, no one showed up, and so I ended up having to do the leave process myself. Now, I'd never been trained in HR, so I really was kind of using my research from Law and Order to help me out here. So I rounded up 2 people as witnesses that were drinking coffee in the hallway and asked them if they could come. I didn't know how upset Beverly would get. And I just said, I have to put an employee on leave, and I want to be sure it goes smoothly. So they came in. And also at this point, I was really wondering who this person was. She had obviously conned me, and I wondered how many people in the department were friends of hers. And these 2 people that I actually didn't even know, that's why I picked 2. I thought, well, be sure to get 2 instead of just 1. Might be one of her good friends. So Beverly came in. Again, she was not at all upset when she read the letter. She just said, "I'm not going," which was a big surprise to me because I didn't think anyone would ever say that. And then she said she wanted to go talk to Raymond. Now, Raymond wasn't in the office because I'd gone upstairs to hopefully ask him to help out, but he wasn't there. And so I told Beverly that she was just going to have to put her belongings in the box that one of the witnesses had, and she could call the number that was in the letter. So what she did was she didn't do anything. So I started putting her shoes in the box. And then she came over to me and she said, no, everything's staying. I'll be back. And then she threatened me. You're going to be sorry you did this. Now, at the time, it didn't bother me because I assumed that she was very upset. And that was really the only time that I ever saw that other side of her. And it didn't frighten me at all. I just figured that an upset person might say something like that. So she then opened her drawer in her office and pulled out a whole bunch of files. Well, again, a red folder ended up in the box of things to take home with her. And that, of course, made me think, she can't take this stuff home with her. And I pulled it out, and I held on to it. And she tried to pull it away from me, and I said, no, this belongs to the university. We'll make copies, and we'll mail them to you. And so she argued a bit, and then she let go. But I opened up the folder, and what I saw was her practicing my signature. And it was very, very good. So yes, forgery was part of the crime as well. So she went home, and eventually things started to turn around. The first thing that happened, though, was the next day I discovered my office had been broken into and ransacked. And, I thought, where are the people to help me with this investigation? Luckily, a few days later, I got a phone call from my friend Dean Percy and said that he wanted to come over and talk to me. And I thought, oh, this is great relief, and the university is going to thank me for... That's not supposed to be funny. So I got all dressed up and waited for Percy to arrive. Well, in my driveway, he handed me the letter and asked me to read it to him out loud. Well, the letter was accusing me of misuse of government funds. And it was not a very nice letter, and there was no thank you at the end. And in fact, I had been served. I had to sign for the letter, and I was told, I was not put on leave, but I was told I could come to work, I could sit in my office, I couldn't talk to my colleagues or my staff, I couldn't use the files, and I wasn't allowed to make any decisions regarding the program. The program had been turned over to the chair. So this was quite alarming, and this was the first time that I realized how dangerous reporting misconduct could be. But I still had this faith that everything would work out. I thought, well, as soon as they see my documents, they'll know. And sure enough, 2 days later, the auditors called me, and I came in, and they saw my documents, and they got it right away. And in fact, I had, again, Law and Order, I created a timeline, And for every time, I had a whole bunch of documentation. I had her letter of confession, her letter taking responsibility. I had 4 letters in the file that had been approved by the chair of the department. And I also had the check, the purchase order, and a few of the travel fraud. Incidentally, the travel fraud was incredible because she had started using my travel and getting reimbursed for my travel, and what she had done was she just copied it, and as though she was there. So I had not signed it. In fact, Beverly, as far as I knew, never traveled, and in fact that was true. We could prove that she didn't travel. It was all false and made up. So at this point, the auditors, going to take over the investigation, and I was very happy about that. But I asked them if I could do one more thing, which was to notify the USDA, because my big concern was being accused of a cover-up. The money that I was receiving, the $14 million, was federal dollars. And I had this responsibility, not just as an employee to the university, but as a person who was responsible for a lot of money from the federal government. So the auditors and I composed a letter that was fairly benign. It said we were doing some review of some purchases. But they read between the lines, and the minute they received it, they sent in the OIG, which is the Office of Inspector General, the federal agents that work for the USDA. And so actually this was a big plus because it meant that we had a huge group of people on this investigation and we could get through the evidence quickly. So there were 2 agents, federal agents from the OIG, 4 UC Davis police officers, 6 auditors, and some campus authorities that were part of the investigation group of UC Davis. And we all worked together. And this is where I want to say that I was treated so well and so professionally throughout the whole investigation by the investigators, by the auditors, by the provost and chancellor's office, and by people that worked there. So my rights as an employee were protected and safeguarded. And the experience was very professional, and I thought they did an excellent and thorough job of investigating this case. So at this point, Beverly is still on leave, and now it's Halloween. I've worked with the special agents. We've gone through about 600 purchase orders and travel, and they have all the information that they need. Now, I didn't actually know, I wasn't adding it up in my head. I had no idea how much fraud, but we did go back 6 years. Anyway, on October 31st, Halloween, a warrant was served in Beverly's house and equipment were seized. And in fact, all that stuff was still in her garage. This is what I couldn't believe. She's put on leave at the end of August. 2 months later, she hasn't even moved any of the equipment that is stolen. In fact, Beverly was so well organized, she even labeled many of the products because she was trying to sell them on eBay, and she would put the eBay ad and tape it to the equipment that she had stolen. So all that property was taken, and Beverly, at that point, she wasn't arrested, but I think they said something about there was going to be an indictment, and so she resigned and retired, receiving her pension of $250,000, which in the state of California, that's you can't touch someone's pension, even if there are allegations of misconduct. Well, things at this point I thought would now get sorted out because the actual criminal was now no longer coming back to Davis, and that was a relief for me. I had a small staff of 5 people, and we all decided that we were going to just work really hard to get the program back on track. We took out the fraud pieces that were pretty easily identifiable. And the USDA was quite willing to let me continue as director. And I was very grateful for that because my big concern was that the program would end due to a fraud case. Food stamps was the source of money, and the government doesn't like fraud. But luckily, the government, said, let's continue the program. And in fact, I worked really hard to make sure that we received another year of funding. Well, this is when retaliation starts notching up, because the first thing that happens is that people stop talking to you. And it could be because they're told that they shouldn't talk to you, or because maybe they were involved, or maybe they knew about it. I have no idea, but I do know that the isolation and the alienation were very, very difficult. Also, I started receiving threats, a pay cut. My office, I was told I needed to move out of the department I was in, and I was given heads up that maybe it would be safer for me to work at home, which is what I did. Well, Beverly was about to be indicted, and the Sacramento Bee was going to do a full story on it, and everyone was very nervous about this. So it turns out my colleagues, many of which I had been friends with for 2 decades, had decided to write a petition to remove me from office. So this is another retaliatory activity. And they tried to do it secretly, but luckily someone tipped me off, and I managed to get a copy of it. It was very, very hurtful. I was accused of all sorts of things: mismanagement, allowing a criminal to steal, even though that was supposed to be confidential. Somehow, I guess, everyone knew about it. 22 of my friends signed their name on the petition, and they sent it to the dean I was now being supervised for, Percy, and asked him to remove me. Well, when I got a hold of it, I'm going to read a small section from the book. I called Percy. "Hi, Percy," I began. "It's Amy. Oh, hello. Did you get the fax?" He had faxed me a copy of the letter. "Yes, thanks. I'm pretty sick about it," I said. After a short pause, I asked Percy, "I'd like to consult with someone about the letter. This isn't about the investigation. This is about retaliation. I know I can't talk about the investigation, but I need guidance on how to handle retaliation." I actually had someone in mind that I wanted to talk to. I'd asked Percy a number of times before, but he'd already denied my request. I hoped he'd soften and change his mind. "Oh, sure," he said, "that makes sense. Now, let's see who you might speak to. Let's think about this." I waited. "Who'd be helpful in this situation?" he said. "Maybe a therapist? A minister?" "I'm Jewish," I reminded him. "Oh, yeah, how about a rabbi?" I had the feeling he was running out of suggestions and worried I might speak to a lawyer. "Percy, can I talk to a neighbor?" "A neighbor?" he said, sounding confused. I waited. "Oh, sure," he said, kind of chuckling at the idea, and then added, "as long as your neighbor doesn't work for UC." I thanked him, said goodbye, and ran across the street, clutching the letter. I knocked on the door of my neighbor. Daniel Ellsberg opened the door. I'm glad you all know who Daniel Ellsberg is. After exchanging a neighborly hello, I announced that I was a whistleblower. He immediately invited me into his kitchen. "Tell me everything," he began as I sat down by the window. "I work for UC Davis. I found embezzlement and confronted my employee in front of the department chair, who told me it was no big deal. I think he's involved, maybe even a cover-up, and I've heard recently about kickbacks. I met with the police and federal agents. The story poured out of me. And now some of my friends, my colleagues, people who attended my wedding, people whom I wrote letters of recommendation, they want to remove me. Here's the petition." "Yes," Daniel told me. "This is all a form of retaliation, and it's against the law. This letter contains their names," he said, and looked down the list. "Typically, an organization will try to get rid of the truth seeker by keeping you unbalanced and distracted. You must not be dissuaded from the job ahead by attempts to harass or disturb you." Daniel told me about his experience and the road ahead for me. "Most likely, you'll not regret what you did, but your life will be different. Friendships you took for granted may tragically end, and people you cared about will abandon and betray you. It's better to know and prepare for these things. Worse, you'll suffer from being a truth seeker. It's going to get harder, but don't despair when your friends desert you. All of it's unfortunate and irreversible. You'll be tested and retested, and they'll try to break you. You need to find new friends and build a new life." He continued, "This isn't an experience that one bounces back from. It's a future-altering event that will change your view of the world forever. Be careful. Things can turn ugly unexpectedly." Hearing him speak so calmly and confidently, I felt comforted. I'd already read these things, but having someone who'd been there tell me about it made a big difference. Daniel was my hero, and I wanted to be just like him. He said, "Few people will understand what you feel," and I hugged him. "But remember, it's you that will sleep better knowing you did the right thing. Accept your new life now and try to embrace it as an opportunity." Well, this is the turning point of my story, because this is exactly the right advice to give a whistleblower. And this is why it's so hard, because the actual truth is you do have to start over. Your life, your career, your reputation, the people that you had known will desert you. But luckily, having heard him give me this advice, and even though it was very difficult to do, it did make a big difference in the outcome of this case and the outcome of my life. And certainly it is a world-shattering event that changes how you view the world. So I went back to Davis very confident, and I told them, "I'm not leaving. This is my program, and I'm not leaving it. And basically, if these people don't want to work with me, fine. It's all voluntary. I'll find other people who will want $1 million contract with me." Well, it turns out after the USDA gave me the money, all these people came back. Surprise, surprise. And in fact, things started to get better because we did have another year of funding. The investigation was starting to wrap up. And in fact, people began to talk to me a bit about the work that we were doing. Well, I thought everything was going to be fine, and that now that I was still director, and I stayed my course, and we got another $13 million, that that everything was going to be smooth again. And this was only 1 year later. So, however, what happened next was the big surprise, and this is the story of retaliation, which is the story about what someone can do to try to make sure that you leave as quickly as possible. So what happened was that Dean Percy, my friend and person who had been working with all these years, he sent me over a helper, someone to replace Beverly on a temporary basis that could get the budget put in place and all the administrative work done. It was a huge relief for me because I had been struggling doing Beverly's job, my own, and a couple other staff had left. And the person seemed really nice, but she lasted 2 weeks. And I was, not surprised. It was very hard dealing with the fact that we were in the middle of an investigation and trying to act normal at the same time. And a lot of people, turns out, were being investigated as well throughout the department. So I was called over by Percy to the dean's office for a meeting. They wanted to let me know about the future of the program. So when I went over there, it turns out that my helper had falsely accused me of violence in the workplace. And she said that I had raised my arm to hit her, that I had, it was a one-on-one meeting, and that I'd yelled at her for 15 minutes and I'd gone off my rocker. And basically, they tried to get me to confess. So this whole meeting was, they kept saying, if you admit to it now, you'll be fine. We won't do anything. We'll just put it in the file. Everything will be taken care of. But I knew better than that. And besides, it was not true. I spent the whole meeting trying to figure out what day she claimed this happened, because I figured that would be the only way I could prove it didn't happen, because my days were pretty busy and I hadn't met with her. So retaliation is a very detailed story about how I proved that violence in the workplace was a false accusation. And in fact, I filed a whistleblower retaliation complaint. So I have my complaint letter in the book. And the university hired an outside investigator to investigate this violence in the workplace, and also whether I was being retaliated against. And my case was substantiated. So at this point, though, no one is speaking to me, and everyone is very nervous and very worried. and I was getting harassed. My office was broken into again. My car was tampered with. One of my tires, a lug nut, was removed, and I had an accident on the freeway. My car was vandalized, and so the police started investigating some of these, but I didn't have any evidence. I just reported on what happened. And at the time when I filed a retaliation complaint, I thought people would leave me alone because I thought it would be too dangerous for them to try to, but that was completely wrong. It only increased the pressure to make me go. And in fact, that's what they do to people who report wrongdoing. They want you to leave. I think the reason is they want to discredit the message by discrediting the messenger. So that's why whistleblowers have a really hard time, and one needs to be prepared when this happens. So my case was investigated and was substantiated, and at that point, I asked the university if I could have a new position on campus, which they did. I got a new position. It was heartbreaking to leave the job that I had loved for so many years, but actually it was a really good thing because the job was not what it used to be. If people aren't talking to you, it's really hard to do the work. So I was given a new position and a new title and a new department, and in fact, I was the only person in the department. I called it a one-woman department. My faculty meetings were very short. And the new work was institutional ethics. That's what I decided that I had spent so much time working with investigators that I kind of found it very interesting. And this is one of the reasons I wrote this book. Now, it's funny because when I wrote it, I was kind of making jokes about it when I would meet with the auditors, that, it's going to come out in a movie and you're going to be played by, and I think no one believed me. but when I published the book, people were stunned. So in my new position, I got 2 promotions, which increased my salary. And then I was able to retire in 2013 and devote my time to writing and speaking about institutional ethics. I also teach a class at UC Davis on ethics. So actually, before I go to questions, let me just fast forward over the results of this 7-year investigation. So there were actually 3 investigations against me. I was cleared in all 3 of them. The first one was the anti-retaliation complaint. That was done by Beverly. And in fact, even though it was confidential, everyone talked about it as the anti-retaliation complaint that Beverly did. So I was cleared. It took 3 months. The second one was about the letter that my colleagues had written about mismanagement of grant funds. And the third one was about violence in the workplace. All 3 I had been cleared of. So Beverly, her amount of fraud ended up being $160,000. And she pled not guilty for 2 years. And then this was prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney in the state of California. And her pleading not guilty meant that she was offered a plea deal in year 3, which she accepted, and she served 1 year and 1 day in federal prison. I was glad that she pled guilty. It was in the newspaper that she had admitted to what she had done. So I was very happy that that happened. And she served her time. Raymond, turns out he had misappropriated $1 million in funds. Now, this is not embezzlement. Embezzlement is for personal benefit. Misappropriation is when you use funds for a purpose not intended by the funding agency. So he had bought departmental servers. Now, of course, it was Beverly who was doing all the work, getting this money for him. He had also renovated his office, the office of his staff. He'd renovated a conference room. And adding it all up, it was about $1 million. That was misappropriation. The dean, Percy, I don't really know what happened. I just know that he was no longer dean of the college after this happened. The program continued and thrived. They hired a new director, someone that I know well. He's a very responsible person and has provided great leadership to the program, and which is thriving and continuing. That was very important to me, because this is a very important program for California to help poor families. UC Davis had to pay the USDA back $2.3 million. So, now, does crime pay? I hope you agree with me that it doesn't. Anyway, thank you for your attendance, and I'd love to answer questions. I also have the 2 books. I sell them at $10 each if you're interested. So, questions? Oh, thank you. Susan.
I'm wondering why you are not using Raymond's real name, since he's the higher-up person here and he committed the more major fraud, and I'm also wondering if he got punished.
You know, every time I give a talk, that is the first question. Thank you. So I didn't use his real name because, well, in fact, let me start by saying after I wrote this book, I hired a literary attorney to review it so I wouldn't get in trouble, because I didn't really want any more trouble. And in fact, the book was really therapeutic for me, because I was able to write down what happened so I didn't have to remember it. Not that I can forget it, but at least I don't have to try to forget it. I have it all documented, and it was something I really enjoyed doing. So the literary attorney suggested that it's rare that an author can get sued writing a memoir, which is what it's written as, but why take a chance? So even though he is in the public domain. The interesting thing was I was interviewed by a newspaper in Davis, the Davis Enterprise, I gave a talk. My first talk was at Davis, at the Avid Reader. And I was interviewed by the Davis Enterprise, and the reporter asked me about the story, and I told him about Raymond, I told him about Beverly. He read the book, and then when he wrote the article, he outed the person, so I didn't really need to. So it's now in the public domain, although if you Google Raymond Savage, UC Davis, it actually ends up going to his article. So, but I didn't think it was important for me to actually say who it was. Now, as for punishment, let's put it this way. He's still there, I'm not. He's still there, yes. He's not chair, but.
So having misappropriated money, he didn't get any punishment?
Well, I'm sure he did. In fact, the rumors are that he's helped Beverly with some legal payments, but I don't know if that's true. Anyway, and in fact, personnel actions are totally confidential. I imagine, though, that he kept in touch with Beverly, and I would consider that to be punishment.
And
Percy
Percy?
is no longer dean.
But he's still at UC Davis?
Yes. Okay, yes.
I'm surprised that the auditors didn't twig to the fact that Beverly was getting paid for the travel that you had done, and you were also getting paid for it at the same time. Did the auditors didn't catch that? Or
That's a good question. So the question was whether the auditors caught whether she was using my travel. I don't know. They didn't actually ask me. I figured it out myself when I saw some of her travel, because what I did was I provided minutes of the meetings and agendas to show that she wasn't there. So I suppose because I provided that, they probably did. But some of the parts of this investigation, they didn't really want to share with me. I had to find a nice way of finding out about it and keeping in touch. And in fact, I think the reason that I managed to last so long in the investigation as part of it was not just because I was whistleblower, but because I had a lot of the documents and the evidence, which is still in my home. I've got 80 boxes of evidence. Yes?
Well, did you feel, now looking back on it, that you wish you had gone to a lawyer to protect you and your whistleblower rights and all that sooner than speaking to a literary lawyer at the end?
Okay, good question to ask if I had wanted to seek legal help right at the beginning. Well, I actually did. Now, in retaliation. Now, one of the things, having worked at the university for a long time, I know what happens when you get an attorney. They stop talking to you. There's no communication. So I did contact an attorney, and I did, get some information very early on when this first happened. And I said, can you work with me as a coach rather than as my attorney? And I'll pay you for the advice, because I wanted to keep the doors of communication open. Also, it's a very good way to run out of money very quickly. So, even though the idea of getting an attorney can protect you, and certainly he was wonderful. And he, in fact, in the retaliation complaint letter I wrote, it's actually his letter, and I put my name on it. So, and you can kind of tell it sounds like an attorney wrote the letter, but I don't think anyone in Davis knew that until afterwards, when they offered me a settlement, was the other thing. So I did get some money to pay back some of the things that I had to pay. But it's hard, and having an attorney, although if you can get someone to do it on a consignment, fantastic, but that's very difficult. Yes, Mary.
So the letter from the colleagues, what was that about? What was it, because you were stirring the pot, they were threatened, in order that they were trying to get you out, the petition, people that you knew, and they weren't really connected with any of this, right? Most of them, or were they?
They were connected. So the question is about the letter and the motives of the people that signed it. I'm going to have to speculate, because I've never heard from any of them about the motives, but I've heard from other people who, and I think this kind of makes sense. So you're a colleague of someone who's being investigated, so you're afraid to talk to them. You're afraid to get involved. But you also have received gifts from the person who's the thief. So that would be another reason why you would not want, because Beverly was quite good. She was very cunning. She gave gifts to people that turned out to be stolen property, and that kept them quiet. That was the kickbacks. She also did favors for people. The forgery, she wrote forged letters. She got the hold of my password on my computer, and she sent emails to people. So there was a lot of damage that I can't really untie. I don't know if she made people really mad at me by writing letters from my computer, making them look like they came from me. The other thing is, some of the people were getting funds from me, from the USDA, and I think they thought that the USDA would not like to have me around because fraud happened on my watch. And that kind of makes sense. I was really lucky that I managed to keep my job and managed to get another year of funding from the USDA. And it was because I had established very good relationships, and I had been doing this for 14 years. It's not like it just happened. And the fraud seemed to be limited. I mean, of course, they didn't know at the time, in 2006, it would end up being $2.3 million. But at the time, it just looked like one embezzler had done a lot of damage. So other colleagues were part of the fraud. So there were a handful of people that I'm sure they would say that what they were doing was completely fine. Misappropriation is something that's somewhat common. People get the idea. And this is, when I teach my ethics class, I talk about two theories. One, doing what's right, and the other one, the ends justify the means. A lot of people thought their work was so important, it was helping low-income people, the trickle-down theory, and that therefore it wasn't misappropriation, it was using resources to help poor families, even though it was very, very indirect. So, yes?
Do you think if you hadn't, what would have happened if you hadn't forgotten your spreadsheet at the very beginning?
Oh, actually, thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so the question, I forgot to end that, to tie that statement up. So the spreadsheet with the 150K for RS, that was part of the misappropriation. If I hadn't have discovered that spreadsheet, I think they probably would have gotten away with it. Although the one thing I've learned is that people who are wrongdoers, they make mistakes. And, but she had been getting away with it for 6 years. In fact, this is why I think she had things in red folders, so she could find them. She was so confident that what she was doing, she would never get caught, that she, didn't want to pay attention, so she put things in red folders so she could find them if she needed to. Yes?
Do you have any sense of what motivated her? I mean, she made a good salary, she has a garage full of things that she hasn't given away. Was it the excitement or?
Good question. So the motivation of Beverly, I have been trying to figure that out myself, because I made sure Beverly did have a good salary. It was very disappointing. The police, when they interviewed me, they asked questions like, was there a gambling problem? Was there a drug problem? Was there a romance problem? And, I said no to all of those. I don't know, but usually there's some reason a person needs more money and the salary isn't enough. And it could be bravado. She might have, I think if she didn't have the chair in her back pocket, none of this would have lasted very long. So her confidence was based on the fact that Raymond Savage, she was helping him, he was helping her. Yes?
Yeah, did you think there was a romance or something between those two? Because that's what it sounds like when you're describing it. Why else would he be protecting somebody in that position?
I have no idea if there was a romance. I was just, every investigator that I met with asked me that question, and my answer was always, I don't think so. So, and my answer now is I don't really know. But it tends to be a typical part of wrongdoing is that there's some sort of favors, yes. Nepotism. There was a lot of favors, whether it involved romance, I don't know. But I think Raymond liked the idea that he had someone who could take the purse strings away from me and sign any form he wanted to buy anything he wanted. The auditors luckily found evidence of the collusion and that it wasn't an accident or he didn't know it was wrong in his emails. So that was a relief to me. But I was conned. I mean, that's one of the lessons I've learned is that I was way too trustworthy, way too trusting of an employee. But when you think about it, she was really a very good employee, and it didn't ever occur to me she was embezzling. Yes, in the back.
From being massively embittered by this experience.
Good question. How do I keep from being massively embittered? I have a good sense of humor. So when I wrote the story, I used my humor to distance me from the hurt. And in fact, I've met so many wonderful people now that I'm interested in ethics. So I'm actually quite happy. It was not a change in my career that I had planned for, and I tell people blowing the whistle is not a good career move. Don't think you're going to move up in the world. In fact, I tell people now that they should blow the whistle anonymously. There are hotlines. It's safer. The workplace needs to make big changes to protect people who report misconduct. Yes?
That was the point I was going to ask you about. What could or what should institutions be doing to keep these things from happening?
Thank you, good question. So Kevin asked, what should institutions be doing to keep this from happening? I give talks at societies for corporate compliance about what I call protecting whistleblowers. And some of the things I suggest they do, and a lot of institutions do this, and in fact, Davis, their investigators, auditors, Office of the Chancellor and Provost did exactly this. First, they investigate promptly. It's very important to get the investigation off the ground very quickly. The next thing to do is to have all the information on a website and a hotline so that people can do it anonymously. Training. People need to know what misconduct looks like. I was very naive. I had no idea what it looked like, what the red flags were. But I learned very quickly. But I think if you get the average employee to understand what fraud looks like, they will be better equipped. But most importantly is to have a contact person that the whistleblower or reporter can communicate with, and have that person be a high-level person at the university. I was given a vice chancellor to communicate with, and even though he received hundreds of emails from me because I documented everything, he never once told me, could you slow down a bit? He was always very receptive, and he made a big difference in the fact that I got through this. So prompt investigation, contact person, information available, and training are the 4 things. And also to make clear that the organization does not tolerate misuse or harassment and all these things, because actually retaliation is a form of discrimination. So any more questions? Very good questions. Thank you. Yes?
I'm assuming this is a self-published book.
The first one I published through, it's Baytree Publishing, and the second one by CreateSpace. I was too nervous to send it out to anyone.
I was wondering if you had approached publishers.
I only approached a few. I had, Alan Rinsler was my editor, and he had a lot of contacts, so he helped me. So he was my editor for both books. And of course, I had a literary attorney whose name is very prominent in the acknowledgments. In case anyone gets mad at me. Call him, not me. So.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you.